Mom, starting tomorrow, these are your new responsibilities in this house. Renata's words echoed in my head as I read the paper she had just handed me. It wasn't a suggestion, it wasn't a request, it was an order. My own daughter, in my own home, was giving me a work schedule, as if I were a newly hired domestic worker. If you don't agree, she continued, her voice cold, a tone she'd perfected over the past few months, you can pack your things and leave. This house needs someone who actually helps, not someone who just takes up space. My hands trembled as I read the list. 6 a.m., wake up and prepare breakfasts. 7, get the kids dressed and take them to school. 8, return the general house cleaning. 9, wash and hang the laundry. 10, prepare lunch. The list continued hour by hour until 11 at night when, according to this document, I should be ironing clothes for the next day. And obviously, Gustavo added from the couch without even looking up from his phone, all this includes paying for the house expenses. That's what your pension is for. No! I stood there in the middle of my own living room, the same living room where I had welcomed Renata when she was born 34 years ago, where I had celebrated her birthdays, where I had comforted her when she cried over her first heartbreaks. Now that same child looked at me with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "You don't have much time to decide, Mom," she said, painting her nails a bright pink. "Gustavo has already spoken with a lawyer. Since we've been living here for over 2 years and maintaining the house, we have rights. So you can be our employee and stay, or you can leave and we'll stay anyway." The threat was clear. In my own house, with the deed in my name, my daughter was blackmailing me. Either I became her personal servant, paying all expenses and working tirelessly, or I'd be kicked out so they could take everything. "Think it over," Renata continued, blowing on her freshly painted nails. "At your age, where else are you going to find a place to live on a $600 pension? At least here you have a roof and food, and you can see your grandkids every day. Unless, of course, you prefer to live alone in some miserable little room." Gustavo let out a cruel laugh. "Besides, honey, let's be realistic. What else are you going to do with your life? At least this way you'll feel useful. It's better than watching TV all day like old ladies your age do." My grandchildren were on the floor, playing with their tablets, completely oblivious to the conversation that was shattering my world. 8-year-old Ethan looked up at me for a moment and asked, "Grandma, are you going to make snacks? I'm hungry." It was the cruelest normality. To them, I was already the housekeeper, the person who fixes things, cleans, cooks, serves, not the grandma who loved them, not the woman who had worked 40 years to buy this house. I was just the free servant who was always available. "Look, Mom," Renata stood up and walked towards me, placing a condescending hand on my shoulder. "It's not that we don't love you. We love you very much. That's why we're giving you the opportunity to stay. But things have to change. This house needs order, and someone has to be responsible for keeping everything running." "And why does that someone have to be me?" I managed to whisper, finding my voice for the first time in this nightmarish conversation. "Because you're the one who doesn't work," Gustavo replied without looking up. "We work, we study, we have real responsibilities. You just collect your pension and don't do anything productive." I felt as if I had been slapped. 40 years working as a secretary in a government office. 40 years getting up at 5 in the morning, taking 2 buses to get to work, saving every penny to buy this house. 40 years raising Renata alone after her father abandoned us when she was just 3 years old. "Don't do anything productive," I repeated, feeling the words choke me. "All these years maintaining this house, paying the bills, buying your food, taking care of your children while you go out, washing your laundry, cleaning up your messes, that's not work, Mom?" Renata interrupted me with that condescending smile I had learned to hate. "That's what anyone living in a house does. The difference is that now it's going to be organized with fixed schedules so everything runs smoother." I looked around my living room. The furniture I had bought with so much sacrifice was ruined. The leather sofa, which had taken me 2 years to pay off, had food stains and tears from when the kids jumped on it without anyone correcting them. The wooden coffee table, which had been my pride, was covered in marks from glasses and hot plates that no one bothered to put on coasters. On the walls, my family photos had been replaced by movie posters Gustavo liked. My book collection had been relegated to a box in the garage to make space for the video games and electronic gadgets they constantly bought with the money I gave them. Besides, Mom, Renata continued, examining her nails with satisfaction, this is going to be good for you. It's going to give you purpose. Lately, you've seemed very depressed, very bored. Having clear responsibilities will help you feel better about yourself. The manipulation was so evident, it physically hurt. She was selling me my own slavery as if it was a favor they were doing me, as if becoming her personal free servant was a form of therapy for my emotional well-being. And you have to work on weekends too, Gustavo added, finally looking up from his phone. Saturdays are for deep house cleaning, and Sundays are for preparing the week's meals. It's not that we're being cruel to you, honey. It's just that we need things to run like a real home. Like a real home, I repeated, feeling anger begin to replace the shock. This isn't a real home. This is the house I bought, that I maintained, where I welcomed you when you had nowhere to live. Yes, but now we're a family, Renata replied, with that twisted logic that left me speechless. And in a family, everyone has their role. Ours is to work and generate income. Yours is to keep the house running. It's fair. Valerie, my 6-year-old granddaughter, approached me and tugged at my skirt. Grandma, can I have cookies? The ones on top of the fridge? I looked at her and saw in her eyes the same expectation I had seen in her mother's eyes when she was her age. The expectation that Grandma always says yes, always fixes things, always available. But now that expectation came with an official schedule, an unsigned contract, an implicit threat. In a moment, my love, I told her, caressing her head. No, Renata interrupted sharply. Valerie, your grandma is going to follow a new schedule. If you want something, you have to ask her at the right time. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon now, and according to the schedule, this is her snack prep time anyway. I walked to the kitchen with trembling legs, feeling as if each step led me deeper into an abyss from which I didn't know if I could escape. The schedule remained in my hand, crumpled by the pressure of my fingers. It was like holding my own emotional death sentence. When I opened the pantry, I realized how empty it was. 3 broken cookies at the bottom of a package, an expired can of tuna, and half a bag of rice. In the refrigerator, the situation wasn't much better. 2 yogurts Renata had bought for herself, 1 of Gustavo's beers, and the leftovers from a 3-day-old dinner that no one else wanted to eat. Grandma, there are no cookies, Valerie shouted from the living room with that impatience she had learned from her mother. I'm coming, my love, I replied, knowing full well that I would have to improvise with what little there was, or rather with what they had left me to have in my own kitchen. I heard Renata's footsteps approaching. Her heels echoed with an authority they hadn't had in this house before. It was as if the simple act of having handed me that paper had transformed her into the official owner of everything. Mom, while you're in the kitchen, I wanted to remind you that you need to go to the supermarket early tomorrow. I made a list of everything we need, she said, sticking a paper on the refrigerator door. It's about $150 worth of groceries. Oh, and you also need to stop by the pharmacy to pick up the kids' vitamins and Gustavo's special shampoo. $150, a quarter of my monthly pension for a week's worth of groceries for a family that had decided my money was theirs by right. Renata, my pension doesn't stretch that far every week, I managed to say, though my voice sounded strangely small in my own kitchen.
"Oh, Mom, always the same," she sighed dramatically. "You know Gustavo is saving for our own house. We can't be spending our income on food and basic necessities. Besides, you eat here every day. It's normal that you contribute to the expenses." The logic was so twisted it made me dizzy. Gustavo was saving for his own house while living rent-free in mine. He ate my food and used my services, and I, the real owner of the property, had to pay for the privilege of being their free domestic worker. "And what if I don't have enough money?" I asked, though I already knew what her answer would be. "Then you'll have to adjust and buy the basics first. The children need to eat well." "Mom, you can't be selfish with money when there are little ones in the house." Selfish with my own money in my own house? The words stabbed me like a dagger in my chest. Gustavo appeared in the kitchen entrance, stretching as if he had just woken up from a nap. It was 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, and
"I'd kick them out of my house tomorrow," she replied without hesitation. "And if you don't have the courage to do that yet, at least start setting boundaries, charging for your services, demanding respect in your own home, reminding them who really owns all of this." We heard the sound of a car arriving. Renata and Gustavo had returned from their romantic retreat, tanned and relaxed, ready to resume the routine where I was their personal employee and they were my benevolent bosses. "Honey," Lucy told me before she left, "if you need to talk, if you need help, if you need someone to remind you that you deserve to be treated with dignity, call me, day or night. And think about this. If a domestic worker worked the hours you work and paid for the privilege of working, how long do you think they would last in that job?" The question haunted me as Renata and Gustavo entered the house, critically checking if I had met all their expectations during their absence. It haunted me as they complained that there was no milk in the refrigerator and that I hadn't bought enough new towels for Gustavo's mother's visit. That night, lying in my bed, which would soon no longer be mine, I began to ask myself for the first time in a long time what would happen if I simply said no. Monday morning arrived like a perfect storm of humiliations. At 5:30 in the morning, the doorbell woke me with its shrill sound. It was Marissa, Gustavo's mother, standing at my door with two enormous suitcases and the expression of someone expecting to be received like a queen. "Finally," she said without even greeting me, pushing her suitcases inside the house. "The taxi took forever. I hope Gustavo explained my special breakfast needs to you. I have a very delicate stomach and can't eat just anything." It was 5:45 in the morning. I hadn't even had time to brush my teeth or comb my hair, but there I was, receiving instructions about the special gastronomic needs of a woman who had invited herself to my house indefinitely. "Good morning, Marissa," I managed to say, though my voice sounded hoarse from interrupted sleep. "Gustavo told me you were coming, but yes, it's good that everything is settled," she interrupted me, looking around my house with a critical eye. "Although I see that this place needs some adjustments. Where is my room? I'm very tired from the trip." My room. The master bedroom that had already been taken from me and that would now be hers during her indefinite stay. I led her down the hallway carrying one of her suitcases that weighed as if it had rocks inside, while she commented on every aspect of my decor that she disliked. "This rug is very worn," she said, pointing to the Persian rug that had been my pride for years. "And these curtains are too dark. At my age, I need a lot of natural light. You'll have to change them tomorrow." Changed the curtains with my money, of course, to make my own room more comfortable for an uninvited guest who had no departure date. When we reached the master bedroom, Marissa inspected everything like a general reviewing troops. She opened and closed drawers, she evaluated the mattress by sitting on it with different levels of force, and finally declared, "This will do. Although I need you to wash all the sheets with hypoallergenic detergent. I can't sleep in beds that aren't spotless." Hypoallergenic detergent, another unplanned purchase, another expense that would come out of my already stretched pension. At 6 o'clock sharp, as Gustavo had promised, Marissa appeared in the kitchen expecting her special breakfast. She was wearing a silk nightgown and feathered slippers, as if she were the owner of a luxury hotel instead of a guest in my house. I need 2 scrambled eggs, but very dry, no oil, whole wheat toast, but barely toasted, not burnt, very light coffee, almost like tea, and fresh fruit, but only the perfectly ripe ones. She recited her demands as if it were a menu I should have memorized. I had no eggs. I had no whole wheat bread. I had no fresh fruit because I had spent all my money over the weekend on the children's whims and cleaning products to keep the house perfect for Renata and Gustavo's return. Marissa, I don't have exactly what you're asking for, but I can prepare something similar, I began to explain. What do you mean you don't have any? She interrupted me, with an indignation that filled the entire kitchen. Gustavo didn't tell you what I needed? This is unacceptable. A house without the basic ingredients for a decent breakfast? At that moment, Gustavo appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for work, with that annoyed expression he wore when something interfered with his perfectly organized routine. "What's going on here? Why so much noise so early?" he asked, although it was his mother who had been shouting. "Your housekeeper doesn't have food in the house," Marissa replied, pointing at me as if I were a defective object. "How am I going to have breakfast with the basic ingredients?" Housekeeper. She hadn't even bothered to pretend that I was anything more than that. To her, I was simply the service staff of her son's house, hired to attend to her needs without question. "Honey, didn't you go to the supermarket this weekend?" Gustavo asked me with that reproachful voice he had perfected to make me feel like a punished child. "Yes, I did, but I spent the money on what Renata asked for the children." And I began to explain. "Oh, please," he interrupted me. "You always have excuses. My mother needs to have a proper breakfast. Go to the supermarket now and buy what's needed, and next time plan better." Go to the supermarket at 7 in the morning? Spend more money I didn't have to please a woman who treated me like trash in my own house. All this while, Gustavo prepared to go to his 3-hour-a-day job, and Renata continued to sleep peacefully in the children's room. "And with what money?" I asked, feeling something harden inside me. "With your pension money, of course," Gustavo replied, as if it were the stupidest question in the world. "That's what you have income for, right? To keep the house running." "My pension is already committed for this month," I said with a firmness that surprised me. "I don't have any more money available for unplanned expenses." The silence that followed was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Gustavo looked at me as if I had blasphemed, and Marissa had the expression of someone who had just witnessed the most incomprehensible rebellion in history. "Are you telling me you can't buy food for my mother?" Gustavo asked, raising his voice with an indignation that would have been comical if it hadn't been so cruel. "I'm telling you I don't have money available right now," I repeated, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "This is incredible," Marissa exclaimed, addressing her son as if I weren't present. "This is the kind of service the family receives in this house, an employee who refuses to do basic shopping." "Honey, this can't go on," Gustavo said, adopting a tone he would have used to scold a problematic employee. "If you can't fulfill the basic responsibilities of maintaining this house, then perhaps we need to reconsider the living arrangements." There was the veiled but clear threat again. "Do you comply with our demands, or do you leave your own house? Do you serve our family with limits, or do you lose the right to live in the place you bought and paid for?" At that moment, Renata appeared in the kitchen, still in her pajamas but fully awake thanks to the noise of the argument. Her presence immediately changed the dynamic of the conversation, as if she were the manager arriving to resolve a labor dispute. "What's going on here?" she asked, though it was obvious she had been listening from the hallway.
Your housekeeper is refusing to go to the supermarket to buy breakfast for my mom, Gustavo explained, as if he were a child reporting another child's bad behavior. Mom, Renata said, with that voice of disappointment she had perfected since adolescence, is it true that you don't want to buy food for Grandma Marissa? The manipulation was perfect. They had transformed my resistance to spending money I didn't have into a cruel refusal to feed a needy elderly woman. They had turned my attempt to set basic financial boundaries into an inexcusable act of selfishness. It's not that I don't want to, I explained, feeling myself defending against accusations I shouldn't have to refute. It's that I've already spent all my money for this month, and I don't have any budget left for additional purchases. Oh, Mom, always exaggerating about money, Renata sighed dramatically. How much can a breakfast cost? $10? $15? Don't tell me you don't have $15 to feed your family. $15 that would become $30 tomorrow, $45 the day after. A constant drain on my pension to keep comfortable a woman who despised me. Besides, Gustavo added, Marissa won't be here forever. It's only temporary while she adjusts to being alone. Can't you make this small sacrifice for the family? Temporary. The same word they had used when they arrived 2 years ago for a stay of a few months. The same empty promise they had used to justify every new invasion of my space, every new demand on my time, every new hole in my budget. And how long is Marissa going to stay? I asked, just to be sure. We don't know exactly, Gustavo replied vaguely. It depends on how she feels, whether she finds activities she likes in the neighborhood, whether she adapts well to the house routine. The house routine, my routine of serving, cleaning.
We can be more flexible. You don't need to bring lawyers to solve family problems. The problem isn't just the schedule, Renata, I said, feeling stronger with each word. The problem is that you have turned me into your unpaid housekeeper. The problem is that you spend my pension as if it were yours. The problem is that you invite people into my house without my permission and expect me to attend to them. Marissa, who had been listening to our discussion with increasing agitation, finally exploded. This is crazy. Gustavo told me he lived with a loving family. He didn't tell me he would live with a crazy old woman who thinks her house is a hotel. Precisely, I replied, looking directly into her eyes. This is not a hotel. It is my house, and in my house, guests are invited, not imposed. But I am Gustavo's mother, she shouted, as if that gave her automatic rights over my property. And I am the owner of this house, I retorted, with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. Your family relationship with Gustavo does not give you rights over my home. Renata had been silently calculating, probably doing math on how much it would actually cost them to live independently. When she spoke again, her voice had a tone I had never heard from her. Mom, let's be realistic, she said, trying to sound rational. We can't pay $800 in rent plus household expenses. You know that. And you can't live alone at your age either. We need each other. I've lived alone before, I replied. I lived alone for 10 years after your father died, before you arrived. And I lived very well, thank you very much. But now you're older, she insisted, playing the age card as a last resort. What are you going to do if you get sick? What are you going to do if you need help? I'll hire professional help if I need it, I said, an idea that had just occurred to me but sounded perfectly sensible. There are many services for seniors that charge for their services and provide them with respect and professionalism. Are you going to pay strangers instead of accepting help from your family? She asked, as if the idea were personally offensive. I'm going to pay for professional services instead of being exploited by people who take advantage of my love for them, I corrected. There's a very important difference. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Gustavo, probably calling to check that his mother had been properly attended to during his absence. Renata ran to answer, speaking in urgent whispers that clearly communicated that a family crisis was unfolding. While she spoke, Marissa approached me with an expression that had changed from indignation to something akin to respect. It was the first time she had looked at me as if I were a real person instead of a talking piece of furniture. "Honey," she said with a considerably softer voice, "maybe we can reach some arrangement. I don't have to stay in the master bedroom. Can I sleep on the sofa?" "Oh, Marissa," I interrupted her gently. "The problem isn't where you sleep. The problem is that you came to my house without my invitation, expecting to be treated like an honored guest indefinitely. That's not fair to either of us." Gustavo arrived home 20 minutes after Renata's call, with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't his usual condescending arrogance. It was something much more dangerous. It was the face of a man who realized that his parasitic world was about to collapse. "Honey, we need to talk," he said with a controlled voice that didn't fool me at all. "Renata told me about these ridiculous letters you brought from some charlatan lawyer." "Attorney David Miller is not a charlatan," I replied calmly. "He is a lawyer specializing in landlord-tenant rights and elder protection, and these letters are not ridiculous. They are perfectly valid legal notifications." "This is a betrayal," he exploded, dropping all pretense of diplomacy. "After everything we've done for you, after keeping you company so you wouldn't be alone, after turning this empty house into a home full of life?" The distortion of reality was so extreme that it almost made me laugh. According to their version of events, they had been doing me a favor by coming to live rent-free in my house, eating my food, using my services, and spending my money. "Gustavo, you are 42 years old," I said, with a patience that was hard to maintain. "If you want to live in a house full of life, you can buy your own house and fill it with all the life you want, but not at my expense." "We've been saving to buy our house," he shouted, as if that justified 2 years of exploitation. "But it's impossible to save when there are so many expenses. You don't understand how expensive it is to raise 2 children." "You're right," I admitted, surprising him with my agreement. "I don't understand how expensive it is to raise 2 children, because when I raised Renata, I paid all her expenses with my own money. I didn't look for an older person to support me." Marissa, who had been observing the discussion from the sofa, decided to intervene with her version of maternal support. "Honey, I understand you're confused, but Gustavo is a good father and a good son. He doesn't deserve to be treated this way by a woman your age who clearly is losing her mind." "Losing my mind?" I repeated, feeling fury ignite in my chest. "For defending your rights in your own home? For threatening your family with lawyers instead of solving problems like civilized adults?" "Civilized adults don't impose work schedules on family members," I countered. "Civilized adults don't threaten to evict the owner of their own house." Gustavo had been pacing back and forth in the living room, clearly calculating his options. When he stopped, he had that expression he wore when he was about to play his strongest card. "Okay, honey," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "If you want to play with lawyers, we can play with lawyers, because it turns out we've been consulting about our rights." "What rights?" I asked, though I already suspected where he was going. "The rights of tenants who have lived on a property for more than 2 years," he replied triumphantly. "The rights of parents who have been raising their children in a stable home. The rights of a family that has been maintaining a property that was deteriorating from lack of care." It was exactly the threat David had warned me they would try to use. The difference was, now I was prepared to face it. "Gustavo," I said with a calm that clearly unnerved him, "I suggest you show those legal consultations to your real lawyer, because my lawyer assured me that no court in the country would grant tenant rights to people who haven't paid rent and who have been financially exploiting the owner." Gustavo's expression changed immediately. It was obvious that his legal consultations were internet searches or conversations with friends, not real professional advice.
Besides, I continued, pulling out my ace in the hole, my lawyer informed me that what you have been doing is called elder exploitation, and that is a federal crime. So if you want to involve more lawyers in this situation, go ahead, but I warn you that the legal consequences for you will be much more serious than for me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children who had arrived from school during our discussion and were listening from the hallway remained completely still. "You're threatening to sue us?" Renata asked, with a small voice she hadn't used since she was a teenager. "I'm not threatening you with anything," I replied. "I'm explaining the legal consequences of your actions, the same consequences my lawyer explained to me this morning." Ethan appeared at the living room entrance with his school backpack still on his shoulders and a confused expression. Why is everyone yelling? And why is Grandma crying? Indeed, Marissa had started crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and humiliation from someone who realized she had completely lost control of a situation she thought she had mastered. "It's okay, my love," I told Ethan, approaching to hug him. "The adults are having important conversations about how we're going to live in this house." "Are we leaving the house?" Valerie asked, who had appeared behind her brother with wide eyes. My grandma's innocent question broke my heart, but it also reminded me why I was doing all this. These children deserve to grow up in an environment where family relationships were based on love and mutual respect, not exploitation and manipulation. "That depends on your parents," I replied, honestly. "If they decide they want to stay here, respecting the house rules and contributing fairly, they can stay. If not, they'll have to find another place to live." "What rules?" Ethan asked, with that direct curiosity children have. "Rules like all adults living here have to work and contribute to expenses," I explained. "Rules like no one can force other family members to work without rest. Rules like we all deserve to be treated with respect." Gustavo looked at me with an expression that would have been intimidating a week ago, but now seemed simply pathetic. "Honey, are you confusing the children with these adult dramas?" "The children were already confused," I countered. They were confused seeing their grandma treated like a housekeeper. They were confused hearing their parents talk about kicking their grandma out of her own house. Now at least they're hearing that there's another way to live as a family. Renata approached her children and hugged them in a gesture that would have been tender if it hadn't been clearly calculated to generate pity. "Children, go to your room and do your homework. The adults need to finish talking." When the children left, the atmosphere in the living room became even tenser. It was as if we were all waiting for someone to make the next move in a chess game where the rules had completely changed. "Okay," Gustavo finally said, adopting a negotiating tone. "Let's say you're serious about all this. Let's say you really want us